I'll never forget the look on my kids' faces when the guard handed me that paper. A suspension notice our entire family banned from the community pool for the rest of the summer. My daughter's eyes filled with tears, my son stood frozen in disbelief, and behind us, HOA President Anna Lynch was already laughing with her friends as they dragged in floaties, toys, and music speakers, the same things she had forbidden every other child from using. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about pool rules. It was about power control and humiliation, and Anna was enjoying every second of it. But here's the thing about me, Nolan Owen. I don't back down when someone pushes my family. 20 years in construction taught me that if the system shuts the door, you build another one. Or in my case, when the HOA locks you out of their pool, you dig deeper, pour concrete, and build something far bigger than they ever imagined. What happened next turned the entire neighborhood upside down. Before we dive into this story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. When my family and I first moved into Maplewood Heights, I thought I had discovered paradise wrapped neatly inside a suburban development. The streets were lined with manicured lawns, the sidewalks glistened after morning sprinklers, and the centerpiece of it all was the Olympic-sized community pool. That pool was the heart of the neighborhood, at least in my eyes. It was the selling point that had tipped the scales when my wife Mia and I debated whether the high HOA fees were worth it. At $425 a month, the costs weren't light. But we justified it because our 3 children, Jason 12, Emma 9, and Liam 7 would grow up with summers filled with water, laughter, and camaraderie. In those early days, everything seemed perfect. I'd come home after long days at the construction site aching and dusty, and the first thing the kids would shout was, "Dad, let's go swim." Mia would pack a tote with snacks, towels, and sunscreen, and we'd walk down to the pool as a family. The air buzzed with the sounds of Marco Polo games, belly flop contests, and parents chatting under umbrellas. Jason quickly joined the community swim team, racing across the lanes like he was born with gills. Emma and Liam took lessons, their confidence growing with each splash. We met neighbors we hadn't even realized lived so close, and suddenly Maplewood Heights wasn't just a subdivision, it was home. Back then, the HOA president was a retired teacher named George Matthews. He was the kind of man who carried warmth in his eyes and a whistle around his neck, but rarely used it. That's what summer sounds like. He'd chuckle whenever kids got a little loud. He had grandchildren of his own, and he understood that community amenities weren't just about maintaining appearances, they were about creating joy. Under his leadership, everything ran smoothly. If there was ever a minor dispute, George handled it with fairness and patience. Nobody felt excluded, and that pool was a true melting pot of Maplewood Heights. But all good things eventually change. When George announced he and his wife were moving to Arizona to be closer to their family, I remember a strange unease gnawing at me. The HOA scheduled a special election to choose his successor, but honestly, I didn't pay much attention. I was drowning in deadlines on a major construction project, and Mia was juggling the kids' schedules. We figured the neighborhood would pick someone reasonable, maybe another family-oriented leader. What we didn't realize was how little turnout actually mattered. That's how Anna Lynch swept in. On paper, she looked polished and professional, late 50s sharp pantsuits, a tidy silver bob, and a resume full of corporate compliance work. She lived alone in one of the biggest houses on the corner lot, and, unlike George, she didn't smile much. At her very first meeting, she marched in with a 3-inch binder labeled Operational Improvements and declared, "This community has been running without proper structure. That changes now." I should have heard the warning bells right then. Her new rules came like a tidal wave. The pool, once the beacon of summer freedom, was suddenly shackled in red tape. She introduced adult swim hours smack in the middle of the day, 1:00 a.m. to 1:00 p.m., and again from 4:00 to 6:00 p.m., precisely when school-aged children wanted to cool off. She banned toys outside of designated times, which meant no noodles, no inflatables, no fun unless she approved it. Even laughter was policed. New signs demanded quiet voices only. And the kicker, any child under 16 had to pass a swimming test administered by Anna herself. She wasn't a lifeguard, wasn't certified in anything related to water safety, but suddenly she was judge, jury, and executioner of whether kids were qualified to swim. At first I tried to shrug it off. Rules were annoying, sure, but maybe it wouldn't be that bad. Then came Memorial Day weekend, the official opening of pool season. My kids, who had been counting down the days, rushed to the gates with their towels wrapped like superhero capes. Within minutes, a whistle blew. Emma had jumped in with a splash. The teenage lifeguard, cheeks red with embarrassment, apologized as he pointed to a new sign, "No splashing allowed." The next week, Jason was penalized for finishing practice 5 minutes past 11:00, technically cutting into adult swim time. A violation notice arrived in our mailbox, complete with a $50 fine. I paid it grudgingly, but I could feel the fire in my chest starting to grow. By mid-June, things had escalated beyond absurd. Emma laughed at something Liam said, just a normal 9-year-old giggle, and Anna's friend Elaine, stationed like a hawk in a chair with a clipboard, stormed over to scold her. We were told to leave for excessive noise. That night at dinner, the kids pushed their plates around with little appetite. "Why doesn't Mrs. Lynch like us?" Emma asked quietly. "We didn't do anything wrong." I didn't have an answer, and the silence at that table was heavier than concrete. The truth was, Anna wasn't just enforcing rules, she was enjoying the control. She had transformed the pool into her personal kingdom, and families like mine were her peasants. I decided enough was enough. I gathered signatures from 15 families, prepared a petition, and marched into the next HOA meeting ready for a fight. The room was divided. On one side, weary parents and kids desperate for fairness. On the other, Anna's loyalists, mostly retirees who cheered her every word. When my turn came, I laid out the petition on the table. "We all pay the same dues," I argued. "But these rules disproportionately punish families with children. The pool is supposed to be for everyone." Anna didn't even blink. She flipped through the pages of signatures, then closed the folder with a sharp clap. "The regulations were properly approved by the board," she said curtly. "If your children cannot behave appropriately in a shared space, perhaps you should consider installing a private pool." Laughter rippled from her supporters. My fists clenched under the table. The petition was dismissed. The motion to reconsider the rules shot down 4-3. The final straw came on a sweltering Saturday in late June. Temperatures pushed 95 degrees. My kids and I had barely settled into our chairs when Anna herself marched up with a security guard in tow. She thrust a paper at me, notice of suspension. Our entire family's pool privileges revoked for the summer due to 3 violations. Those violations: Jason's late practice, Emma's laugh, and Liam's floating lesson with Jason. I stared at her in disbelief. "This is absurd," I said. "If you don't leave now," Anna replied with a smirk, "we'll consider it trespassing." The guard looked uneasy, but he stood by her. My children's eyes watered as I packed our towels in silence. Walking home that day felt like a funeral march. Their summer had been stolen, ripped from them by a woman who cared more about power than people. As we rounded the corner, my rage burned hotter. There at the pool gates, Anna's friends streamed in coolers, clinking floaties, bouncing under their arms, laughter spilling across the pavement. The very toys my children were banned from using bobbed in the arms of grown adults heading for a private gathering. Something inside me snapped. If Anna wanted to play queen of the pool, so be it. But I wasn't going to let my kids' summer die under her rules. No, if she thought she had won, she had no idea who she was dealing with. Because I, Nolan Owen, had just decided to build something that would not only give my kids their summer back, it would flip Anna's kingdom upside down. The night after that humiliating walk home from the pool, I didn't sleep a wink. I sat at my desk staring at the violation notice Anna Lynch had shoved into my hands. The HOA's letterhead, crisp and official, almost mocked me from the page. Suspension of pool privileges, repeated violations, unsafe conduct. My jaw tightened as I read it for the 10th time. Unsafe conduct. My 12-year-old son, helping his little brother float on his back, was now considered dangerous. No, this wasn't about safety, it was about control. And Anna Lynch was enjoying every ounce of the power she thought she wielded. I opened the thick HOA binder we'd received when we moved into Maplewood Heights. The covenant's conditions and restrictions, CC&Rs, were supposed to outline community rules, a roadmap for harmony. What I found instead was a tangled mess of vague language that Anna had twisted to her advantage. Buried in the fine print was a section on amenity regulation authority. It allowed the board to establish policies, but clearly stated they must be applied fairly and without discrimination. I couldn't help but smirk. If this ever reached a courtroom, Anna would be the one squirming, not me. But lawsuits take time. Months, sometimes years. And my kids didn't have months they had this summer. I needed something faster. The next step was organizing. I wasn't the only one fuming. That very week I knocked on doors, clipboard in hand, gathering stories from other families. Carlos Rodriguez, a father of 2, told me his daughter had been scolded for using a pool noodle during non-toy hours. She'd come home in tears, asking if she had done something wrong. Maria Chen shared how she tried to speak up at a board meeting, pointing out that the new restrictions contradicted the HOA's original amenities agreement, but Anna cut her microphone mid-sentence. It was the same story everywhere: families humiliated, kids treated like intruders in their own neighborhood. We formed a coalition, 30 families in total. We decided to petition formally demanding the rollback of Anna's rules. At the next HOA meeting, I was prepared. I wore my work boots and hard hat, a little theatrical maybe, but I wanted to remind them I wasn't just some dad whining about pool toys. I was a builder, a man who dealt with concrete facts and hard structures. I stood at the podium, petition in hand, my voice steady but firm. These signatures, I said, holding the papers high, represent families who pay the same fees as everyone else. Families who deserve equal access to the amenities our money maintains. These rules are unfair, selectively enforced, and in violation of the HOA's own bylaws. This isn't about order, it's about exclusion. I looked directly at Anna as I said that last word. Her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. When it came time to vote, the room split like oil and water. Parents and families sat tense and hopeful, while Anna's loyalists, mostly older residents without children, clapped in support of her every word. The final tally, 4 against 3 in favor. Our motion failed. After the meeting, as families filed out, Anna intercepted me at the doorway. "You seem to have a lot of energy, Mr. Owen," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Maybe you should consider channeling it into something more productive than stirring up drama." I clenched my jaw but forced a smile. "Oh, don't worry, Anna. I've got plenty of ideas on how to be productive." What I didn't tell her was that I was already thinking far beyond petitions and votes. That night back at my desk, I started digging deeper. I pulled up the original plat maps for Maplewood Heights from the county's website. Years in construction taught me how to read development plans like a second language. That's when I noticed something strange. The rear corner of my property didn't fall neatly under the HOA's jurisdiction lines. It was part of a grandfathered parcel from an earlier subdivision, technically zoned differently. My heart raced as I double-checked the details. Could it be that Anna's reach didn't extend as far as she thought? The next morning, I called Marcus, an old friend who worked in the city planning department. Over coffee at a diner, I slid the map across the table. "Tell me what you see," I said. Marcus studied it, then looked up with a grin. "You're right. That section of your backyard is zoned residential recreational. It predates the HOA's authority. You could put a sports court, a playground, even a swimming pool back there, as long as you have city permits." A laugh burst out of me before I could stop it. "So you're telling me I could build a pool without Anna's approval?" "Not just a pool," Marcus said. "Anything that qualifies as recreational. It's your land. The HOA can't touch it." That single sentence flipped a switch in my mind. All the rage, all the humiliation, all the nights my kids had gone to bed asking why they weren't welcome at their own pool, suddenly it had somewhere to go. If Anna Lynch thought she could bar my family from the community pool, fine. I'd build something better. Not just for my kids, but for every family she had trampled under her rules. I grabbed a napkin from the diner counter and started sketching. My hands moved on instinct like they always did when inspiration struck. A splash pad for the younger kids. A modest slide that emptied into a landing pool. A waterfall feature for atmosphere. Shaded seating for parents. Safety fencing to exceed city requirements. And maybe, just maybe, a name that would sting every time Anna heard it. By the time I finished my coffee, the words "Project Splashback" were scrawled across the napkin in bold letters. I knew the road wouldn't be easy. Permits needed filing. Equipment had to be sourced. Crews had to be organized. But for the first time since Anna had marched into Maplewood Heights with her binder of rules, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. This wasn't about fighting her on her terms anymore. This was about rewriting the rules of the game. That night, I called Carlos and Maria. "I'm not just talking petitions anymore," I told them. "I'm building something. Something Anna can't control. And when it's done, every family in this neighborhood will have a place to swim." Carlos let out a low whistle. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Dead serious," I said. "She wanted to push us out. Fine, we'll make our own way back in and we'll do it bigger." Maria chuckled, but there was steel in her voice. "If you pull this off, Nolan, you won't just be building a water park. You'll be building a community again." As I hung up the phone, I could already picture it, the laughter of kids echoing from my backyard, the splash of water jets, the cheers as little ones raced down slides. And across the street, Anna Lynch, fuming in her lounge chair, powerless to stop it. For the first time all summer, I went to bed smiling. Because if Anna thought she'd won, she was about to learn what happens when you push a builder too far. When I woke up the next morning, the vision of Project Splashback was still seared into my mind. I rolled out of bed before Mia and the kids stirred, grabbed a tape measure, and stepped into the backyard. The air was damp from last night's rain, and the grass clung to my boots as I walked toward the far corner of the lot, the very corner Marcus had confirmed was outside Anna's iron grip. I paced it out mentally, carving the space into zones. Slide here, splash pad there, shaded benches along the fence line. My mind spun like it did whenever I was managing a job site. Only this time the project wasn't for a developer or a client. This was for my family and every neighbor who'd been pushed aside by Anna's ridiculous reign. The more I walked the space, the more excited I became. My kids had been robbed of their summer, but now maybe I could give them something even better than the HOA pool. No lifeguards glaring, no whistles blowing at laughter, no clipboard warriors tallying imaginary violations. Just freedom. And water. Lots of water. After breakfast, I broke the news to Mia. She was skeptical at first. "Nolan, this sounds expensive. And what if the HOA tries to stop you?" I grinned, sliding the plat map across the table. "They can't. This section isn't under their jurisdiction." I checked with Marcus. As long as I pull the right city permits, we're bulletproof. She studied the map, then looked at me. "And you really think you can build a whole water park back here?" I laughed. "Mia, I've built half the office parks in this county. A water park, that's child's play." By lunch, I was on the phone with Marcus again, this time filling out the official paperwork for a residential recreational water feature. The process usually took weeks, but Marcus promised he'd expedite it. "I've seen what that woman's been pulling," he said. "If anyone deserves a break, it's you." With permits in motion, I turned to design. I dusted off my old drafting table in the garage, spread out clean sheets of graph paper, and sketched until my pencil wore down. I wanted the place to be safe, but also thrilling. I envisioned a compact splash pad with water jets that could shoot streams into the air for the little ones. Beside it, a modest slide with a gentle curve feeding into a catch pool deep enough for fun but shallow enough for safety. A rock-style waterfall feature would anchor the corner, doubling as eye candy and white noise to drown out any echoes of HOA nonsense. Around it all, a sturdy fence with a lockable gate built higher than the minimum safety code required. But I wasn't stopping there. If this was going to be a true rebellion against Anna's tyranny, it had to shine. I planned shade sails for the parents' benches, with cup holders and solar heating panels to keep the water at a comfortable temperature. I even sketched a small cabana for changing and storing towels. The kind of thing that said this isn't just a pool, it's an experience. That evening, I gathered my kids in the living room and showed them the sketches. Their jaws dropped. "Wait, this is going to be in our backyard?" Jason asked, eyes wide. Emma clapped her hands. "Can we invite our friends?" Liam bounced up and down like a pogo stick. "I want the slide." "Dad, can I go first on the slide?" Their excitement was like rocket fuel. For weeks they'd been dragged down by Anna's oppressive rules. Now they were glowing again, buzzing with hope. That was all I needed. The next step was sourcing. I called old contacts from my construction days, guys who owed me favors or remembered the times I'd helped them out on tight deadlines. One by one they came through. A supplier in Richmond offered me a discount on water pumps. A concrete crew in Maple County agreed to work overtime shifts. A landscaper buddy promised to donate extra sod and decorative plants once the main work was done. The project wasn't just taking shape, it was gaining momentum. Of course, word got out fast. In neighborhoods like ours, gossip traveled quicker than the mail. By day 3 of site prep, I caught 3 mothers walking their strollers past my yard, slowing down to peek at the action. One of them called out, "What's going on back there, Nolan?" I smiled, wiping sweat from my brow. "You'll see soon enough. Let's just say your kids might have a new favorite hangout." By day 5, the sound of jackhammers and backhoes echoed across Maplewood Heights. Excavation crews dug deep into the corner lot, preparing the foundation for the splash pad and pool. My kids sat on lawn chairs sipping lemonade, cheering like it was their personal halftime show. But not everyone was impressed. On the 3rd evening of construction, I looked up from the plans to see Anna Lynch herself striding down the sidewalk, flanked by 2 board members. Clipboard in hand, she looked like a hawk circling prey. "This construction has not been approved by the Architectural Review Committee," she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I wiped my hands on my jeans and grinned. "Evening, Anna. Funny thing, you don't have any authority over this part of my property." I handed her a copy of the plat map, city permit, and zoning documents I'd prepared in advance. "It's all legal, all permitted. Out of your jurisdiction." She flipped through the papers, her face reddening with every page. "This is clearly an attempt to circumvent HOA authority." "You're welcome to call your lawyer," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Mine's already on standby. And just so you know, any attempt to interfere might count as harassment." Her eyes narrowed into slits. For a moment, I thought she might explode right there on the sidewalk. Instead, she snapped the folder shut and hissed, "We'll see about this." Then she turned on her heel and stormed off, her board members trailing behind. I couldn't help but laugh as I watched her go. For once, the Queen of Maplewood Heights had been knocked off her throne. The next morning, an envelope arrived in my mailbox, a cease and desist letter from the HOA's attorney. I handed it to my own lawyer, who responded within hours. My client's project is fully compliant with city zoning and permits. Further attempts at interference will be considered harassment and subject to legal action. With that, the noise from the HOA went quiet for now. Construction roared on. Concrete was poured and cured. Plumbing lines were fitted and pressure tested. The pumps arrived on schedule, sleek and efficient, ready to recycle thousands of gallons with ease. Safety fences went up around the perimeter higher than code with lockable latches. By the second week, the structures were standing tall, and even from the sidewalk, curious families could see something magical taking shape. My backyard was becoming the one place in Maplewood Heights where kids could actually be kids, and Anna Lynch could do nothing but watch. The sun was beating down on my backyard, and the air was thick with the smell of wet cement. By the start of the third week, Project Splashback had gone from sketches on a napkin to a living, breathing construction site. Crews in hard hats moved like ants welding joints, laying pipe-tightening bolts. The sharp clang of rebar, the hiss of power saws cutting through PVC, the rumble of cement trucks, these were the sounds of my rebellion. My neighbors, curious at first, had now become daily spectators. Parents wheeled strollers up the sidewalk just to watch the progress. Kids peered through the fence wide-eyed, and even the local mailman lingered an extra minute each day, trying to sneak a peek at the transformation. From the start, I knew this project had to be more than a slapdash pool. It had to be professional, safe, and impossible to attack legally. I overbuilt everything. If code said the fence needed to be 4 feet, I built it 6. If the law required 2 drains, I installed 4. The pump system wasn't just efficient, it was hospital grade, capable of filtering water twice as fast as most community pools. I invested in anti-slip surfaces for the splash pad, shatterproof lighting, and shade structures bolted down to withstand storms. Every corner of the build screamed, "Try to fight this and you'll lose." And of course, Anna tried. On the 4th day of concrete work, she returned. This time she wasn't alone. 2 HOA board members flanked her, one with a camera pointed directly at my yard. Anna's heels clicked on the sidewalk like gunshots as she marched toward me. "Stop this immediately," she barked, pointing a manicured finger at the excavated pool. "This project has not been sanctioned by the HOA. You're in violation of community aesthetics and will be fined daily until this nonsense ceases." I didn't even look up from the blueprint in my hands. "Good morning, Anna. Careful with those shoes. Cement dust ruins leather." She scowled, snapping her fingers at the man with the camera. "Document everything. This will be evidence." I finally looked up and handed her a manila folder. "Here, plat map, zoning approval, and city permits stamped and signed. The HOA has no jurisdiction over this section of my property. And for the record, your friend with the camera is trespassing. Step onto my lawn and I'll call the police." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Anna's jaw tightened as she flipped through the papers. She hated that I was right. With a huff, she shoved the folder back at me and snapped, "This isn't over." She was half right. It wasn't over. But not in the way she imagined. The very next morning, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a cease and desist letter from the HOA's attorney. I barely skimmed it before sending a copy to my lawyer, Evan Marks. Evan had the kind of voice that could charm a snake and the brain of a chess master. Within hours, he fired off a response that made me chuckle out loud. "My client's project is fully compliant with city zoning. Any further attempts to interfere will be documented as harassment. Kindly direct future correspondence to my office." With Evan in my corner, the HOA's threats fizzled. They knew they couldn't touch me legally, so Anna resorted to theatrics. 2 days later, I noticed a strange car parked across the street, a county health inspector's van. My stomach clenched at first, but when the inspector stepped onto my property, he was all smiles. "Routine check," he said, clipboard in hand. He walked the site, testing water samples, examining plumbing, double-checking the safety fencing. After an hour, he handed me his report, full compliance. Not only that, but he complimented the water quality system I'd chosen. "Cleaner than most city pools," he said with a grin. When the inspector left, I looked across the street. Anna was standing there, arms crossed, seething. She had sent the inspector hoping to shut me down. Instead, she'd handed me a glowing endorsement. Word spread faster than wildfire. Families whispered excitedly, and the cul-de-sac kids tugged at their parents' sleeves, begging to know when the backyard water park would open. By the end of the second week, people I barely knew were approaching me at the grocery store. "Nolan, I heard you're building something incredible," one mother said. "If you ever need volunteers, count us in." And while my allies grew, so did Anna's paranoia. She doubled down on HOA patrols, stationing her friends like prison guards at the community pool. Families who dared to laugh too loudly were warned. Kids who splashed were threatened with suspension. It was as though she thought doubling her iron grip would stop the tide rising against her. She couldn't see it was only making her look more ridiculous. By the third week, construction was ahead of schedule. The splash pad was fully installed jets ready to launch arcs of water into the air. The slide gleamed under the sun, its curves smooth and inviting. The waterfall feature trickled into the catch pool even before the pump system was fully activated. I tested the solar panels on the roof of the cabana, smiling when the heating gauge ticked upward. That Friday night, I sat in a lawn chair at the edge of the nearly finished park. The work lights buzzed, casting long shadows across the cement. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine it, the laughter, the squeals, the splashing. My kids running free, their joy unpoliced by whistle-wielding lifeguards or rule-happy retirees. My vision was so clear it felt almost real. The very next morning, it became realer than I ever expected. At 8 a.m., while crews were pouring the last section of concrete, a line of neighbors formed on the sidewalk. Parents holding coffee mugs, kids clutching soccer balls, teenagers craning their necks to see over the fence. They weren't just curious anymore, they were invested. Carlos Rodriguez stepped forward. "We heard you're calling this thing Project Splashback. When's the grand opening?" I laughed, wiping my brow. 2 weeks if all goes to plan." The crowd erupted in cheers, kids jumping up and down, parents nodding with satisfaction. And standing at the edge of the street, arms crossed, was Anna Lynch. Her face was red, her jaw clenched, her hands balled into fists. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She wasn't just losing control, she was watching her kingdom crumble. That night, after the crews left, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat on the porch with Mia. The air was warm, cicadas buzzing in the distance. She leaned against me, her voice soft. "You know you're not just building a water park, you're building something bigger." I looked at her puzzled. She smiled. "You're building community." Something Anna could never understand. I stared out at the construction site, the floodlights casting a glow over the fresh cement. She was right. Anna thought she had ended our summer, but all she had done was light the spark for something greater. Something she couldn't control. Project Splashback wasn't just a pool. It was a statement. And very soon it would be open for business. The morning the last section of landscaping went in, I stood back, hands on my hips, and felt a pride I hadn't tasted in years. The yard that had once been just a sloping patch of grass was now alive with color and motion. The splash pad gleamed its water jets, already synchronized to shoot arcs like playful fountains. The slide curled gracefully into the pool, the waterfall cascaded with a steady murmur, and the shade structures billowed gently in the summer breeze. Even the cabana smelled fresh with new wood and paint. But it wasn't until my kids stepped into the space for the first time that I knew I'd done something special. Jason ran straight for the slide, Emma shrieked with delight under the splash jets, and Liam jumped into the shallow catch pool with a cannonball so loud I thought the neighbors might cheer. Their laughter was unfiltered, their joy unrestrained. No whistles, no fines, no Anna, just freedom. I didn't keep it to myself for long. The very next week, invitations went out, not formal cardstock, but printed flyers that Mia and the kids helped slip into mailboxes. At the top, bold letters read, "The Maple Splash Club Grand Opening." Below that, "Families Welcome." Free membership. Bring your kids, bring your laughter. No HOA board members allowed. When Mia read the last line aloud, she burst out laughing. "That's gonna drive Anna insane." "That's the point," I said, grinning. Saturday arrived with a heat wave that sent temperatures soaring toward 98 degrees. By noon, cars were lining the street outside my house. Families filed through the side gate, kids clutching towels and goggles, parents balancing coolers and lawn chairs. I set up a simple check-in table at the entrance with a stack of liability waivers. Nothing complicated, just standard language I'd printed from a template Evan, my lawyer, provided. Each family signed, each child received a laminated membership card with Maple Splash Club printed across the top. You would have thought I'd handed them golden tickets. The kids held those cards like they were badges of honor. By 1 o'clock, my backyard was transformed into something out of a summer festival. Kids darted between the splash pad and the slide, shrieking with delight as water sprayed around them. Parents lounged in the shaded seating, chatting, swapping snacks, laughing in a way I hadn't seen since before Anna's reign. Maria Chen set up a table of homemade dumplings. Carlos Rodriguez fired up a portable grill for hot dogs, and within an hour the place smelled like a block party. "This is amazing," Carlos said, handing me a paper plate stacked with food. "My kids haven't smiled like this all summer." Maria, balancing a cup of iced tea, nodded. "This is what community should feel like, not whatever circus Anna is running." I looked around, the sound of laughter washing over me, and realized Maria was right. This wasn't just rebellion, it was reclamation. We were taking back the spirit Anna had stolen. But not everyone was celebrating. Across the street, the HOA pool sat nearly empty. The only figures in sight were Anna and her loyalists, perched stiffly in their lounge chairs, glaring across the road like statues. They had no music, no food, no laughter, just a barren stretch of water reflecting their sour expressions. At one point, I caught Anna's eyes. She raised her wine glass toward me in a mocking salute, then turned her back. But I didn't need her approval. I had the approval of 20 families splashing in my backyard, and that was worth more than every vote she'd ever stolen. As the day went on, the club took on a life of its own. Parents offered to contribute supplies for future weekends, snacks, folding chairs, even a shade umbrella someone had stored in their garage. Kids began making plans for next time, already treating the Maple Splash Club like a permanent fixture of their lives. It was Carlos who first suggested we formalize it. "Look," he said between bites of a burger, "if you want this to last, we should make it official. Not complicated, just a club charter. Private property, private membership. That way if Anna tries to pull some legal stunt, you've got everything covered." I thought about it, then nodded. "You're right. If she can twist the HOA bylaws, she'll try the same here. Let's make this airtight." That night, after the last family left and my kids fell asleep exhausted but smiling, I sat down at the dining room table with Evan on speakerphone. We drafted a simple charter. The Maple Splash Club is a private nonprofit club hosted on the property of Nolan and Mia Owen. Membership is free and limited to Maplewood Heights families with children under 18. HOA board members are excluded to prevent conflicts of interest. When I read that last line aloud, Evan chuckled. "That's going to sting. But it's perfectly legal. As long as you're consistent, you can set the membership criteria however you want." And we were consistent. The following weekend, families lined up again, waivers signed, cards handed out. Each kid proudly clipped their Maple Splash Club card to their swim bag like a badge of rebellion. But with each success, Anna's fury grew. The first shot she fired came in the form of another letter, this one claiming my club violated community harmony rules and that all neighborhood gatherings must be approved by the HOA. Evan fired back immediately, "Private property, private club. Your board has no jurisdiction here." Her second attempt was sneakier. She filed a complaint with the city claiming I was running a commercial water park in a residential zone. The inspector showed up, clipboard in hand, looking skeptical. But when he walked through, all he saw were families enjoying themselves. No money changing hands, no tickets, no cash box. He closed his notebook with a sigh. "Looks like you're just having fun with friends. Nothing illegal here." When the inspector left, I caught sight of Anna standing down the street, her phone still in her hand. The look on her face was priceless. She had swung twice and missed both times. But the most audacious move came 2 weeks later. One afternoon, I was manning the check-in table when Anna herself strolled up, oversized sunglasses shielding her eyes. "I'd like to join," she said coolly, sliding the waiver across the table. "I have every right to enjoy this facility as a resident of Maplewood Heights." I leaned back in my chair and folded my arms. "Sorry, Anna. Read the charter. HOA board members are excluded." Her lips thinned. "That's discrimination." I smiled. "No, that's membership criteria. This is a private club on private property. My lawyer assures me it's perfectly legal." Her face turned crimson. For a moment I thought she might snatch the clipboard and rip it in half. Instead, she spun on her heel and stormed off her heels, clacking against the pavement like gunshots. When she was gone, Carlos leaned over laughing. "She actually tried to join. That's rich." "Oh, she'll be back," I said, shaking my head. "But every time she tries, she just proves our point. This isn't about rules. It's about control. And she's losing it." That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, Emma looked up at me with sleepy eyes. "Daddy, are we really going to keep the Splash Club forever?" I smiled, brushing hair from her forehead. "As long as you want it, kiddo. This club is yours." And as I turned off the light and closed her door, I realized something powerful. This wasn't just a summer project anymore. This was a legacy, a statement, a fortress of joy in the middle of Anna's empire of control. And the best part, it was only the beginning. If Anna Lynch was rattled before the Maple Splash Club's second month pushed her straight into desperation, she had gone from smug queen of the HOA pool to a figure huddled under her umbrella watching her kingdom empty while laughter and music spilled from my backyard. And like any ruler losing power, she decided the only way to regain control was to wage war. Her first strike was pure theater. One evening, envelopes stamped with the HOA seal landed in dozens of mailboxes. The letter claimed that unauthorized recreational facilities threatened the visual harmony and property values of Maplewood Heights. It went on to propose a new regulation banning structures with moving water features within the community. The kicker: the vote required a two-thirds majority of homeowners to pass. By then, more than half the families had already attended a splash club gathering. They'd watched their kids smile for the first time in weeks, eaten Maria Chen's dumplings, and sipped Carlos Rodriguez's grilled corn lemonade concoction while their toddlers ran wild in the splash pad. When the HOA vote came, Anna's motion flopped spectacularly. Not even close. She managed to scrape together a third of the community, the same retirees who clapped at every rule she invented, but everyone else saw through her. Her second strike was sneakier. A week later, I got a notice taped to my door: HOA fine, issued for excessive noise and nuisance activity. I laughed out loud when I read it. They were fining me for my own backyard. The problem: the Maple Splash Club wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. I called Evan, my lawyer, who chuckled as he drafted his response. The HOA has no authority over my client's property. Further attempts to fine him will be documented as harassment. Consider this your final warning. Anna didn't back down. She doubled her patrols, dispatching her clipboard warriors to the sidewalks bordering my home. They stood like sentries, scowling at families arriving with towels and floaties, writing notes in their little pads as if they were FBI agents. My members laughed it off, waving cheerfully as they walked by, which only seemed to make Anna angrier. But she wasn't finished. No, her third move was her boldest yet. Late one Friday afternoon, as kids shrieked down the slide and parents lounged in the shade, a white sedan rolled up. Out stepped two city code enforcement officers. They walked briskly to my gate, clipboards in hand, eyes scanning the water features. Anna trailed behind them, wearing a grin so wide it could split her face in two. "This is it," she hissed loudly enough for nearby families to hear. "Your little illegal water park is finished." The officers introduced themselves politely, then asked to inspect the property. I welcomed them in, confident in my preparation. They checked the pumps, examined the drainage system, tested chlorine levels, and measured the fence height. Kids splashed around their boots, giggling as the officers scribbled notes. After half an hour, the lead inspector closed his folder. "Mr. Owen," he said, "your facility exceeds code in every way. Frankly, it's safer than most public pools we've inspected this year." Parents erupted in applause. Kids cheered. Anna's grin collapsed into a snarl, but she stammered. "You can't just let this circus operate in a residential neighborhood." The inspector turned to her. "Ma'am, this is a private recreational facility on private land. We have no jurisdiction to shut it down. In fact, I wish more neighborhoods had setups this safe." Anna's face burned crimson. She spun on her heel and stormed off her heels, stabbing the sidewalk like daggers. That night, after the crowd thinned, Carlos approached me with a conspiratorial grin. "You'll want to see this," he said, holding up his phone. It was an email, or rather a series of them. Somehow, don't ask me how Carlos had connections, a string of HOA board emails had leaked. In them, Anna outlined a preferred residence list, a roster of her allies who would be quietly exempted from the stricter pool rules. Worse, one email showed she had rented out the HOA pool to a private event company for a wedding reception, pocketing a tidy profit, while families were told the pool was closed for maintenance. My jaw clenched as I scrolled. This wasn't just hypocrisy, it was corruption. "We need to share this," Maria said firmly. At the next HOA meeting we did. 30 parents packed the community center, waving printed copies of the leaked emails. I took the floor. "Anna Lynch has claimed this is about order, about safety," I said, holding up the papers. "But while our kids were banned for laughing too loudly, she was hosting private parties at the community pool. While we paid $425 a month, she created a secret list of favored residents who never had to follow her rules. This isn't leadership, this is abuse." The room exploded. Parents shouted. Even some of Anna's staunchest supporters sat, stunned betrayal etched on their faces. Anna tried to gavel the meeting back to order, but the noise drowned her out. Finally, she slammed her binder shut and stormed out the door, slamming behind her like a gunshot. But the damage was done. The emails spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Screenshots were forwarded, printed, tacked to bulletin boards. Anna's credibility shattered overnight. Back at the Splash Club, the fallout was immediate. Families who'd once been hesitant now flocked to join. We had more than 50 children with laminated club cards by the end of the week. Parents brought foldable tables, donated coolers, even organized a rotating snack schedule. It was no longer just my project, it was the community's. I stood at the edge of the splash pad one evening, watching the sunset cast golden light across the water jets. Emma and Liam danced under the fountains. Jason raced his friends down the slide, and parents sat laughing plates piled high from a potluck spread. It looked less like a backyard and more like a festival. "This is bigger than you now," Mia whispered beside me. I nodded slowly. She was right. I had started Project Splashback as revenge, a middle finger to Anna's tyranny. But somewhere along the way it had transformed into something else. Something Anna could never control. A genuine community stronger than any HOA rulebook. Of course Anna wasn't finished. People like her never quit quietly. The very next day I found a thick envelope in my mailbox, a lawsuit notice. The HOA, under Anna's leadership, was suing me for operating a discriminatory club. Her argument: by excluding board members from membership, I was guilty of the very thing I accused her of. I laughed as I read it, but deep down I knew this was serious. Lawsuits meant time, money, and stress. She was trying to drag me into a legal quagmire, betting that the cost alone would break me. I called Evan immediately. He skimmed the document and snorted. "This is pathetic. They don't have a leg to stand on. A private club on private property can set its own criteria. This is just harassment in a new form." But still, I couldn't shake the feeling Anna was wounded, cornered, and dangerous. And a cornered queen is often the most reckless of all. The war for Maplewood Heights wasn't over. It was about to enter its ugliest phase. By midsummer, the battle lines in Maplewood Heights were no longer subtle. On one side was the Maple Splash Club, our backyard rebellion that had blossomed into a sanctuary of laughter and community. On the other was Anna Lynch, clinging desperately to the shards of her authority, using every tool at her disposal to punish us for daring to live without her permission. The lawsuit she filed against me turned out to be more bark than bite. Evan, my attorney, dismantled it in weeks, filing counterclaims that painted the HOA's behavior as harassment. The board's funds drained quickly after all legal fees don't pay themselves, and the HOA treasury wasn't bottomless. Homeowners began asking uncomfortable questions. Why are our dues being wasted on lawsuits against families instead of maintaining the pool? At the July board meeting, the tension was palpable. Parents packed the room, arms crossed, while Anna sat at the front table, binder open like a shield. The treasurer cleared his throat nervously before delivering the bad news. "Our legal expenditures have exceeded the quarterly budget by 30%, he said, his eyes flicking toward Anna. "And with declining pool usage, maintenance costs are eating into reserves. If this continues, we may need to raise fees." The room erupted. One father shouted, "We're paying $425 a month already for a pool our kids can't use, and now you want more." Another mother raised her hand. "Why should we pay for Anna's lawsuits when she's the one who created this mess?" Anna banged her gavel furiously. "Order. This is about community standards. We must preserve property values and harmony." But her words rang hollow. The more she shouted, the more people saw the truth. She wasn't defending the community, she was defending herself. Then came the breaking point. 2 days after that meeting, a thunderstorm rolled across Maplewood Heights, the kind that cracks the sky open with lightning and pounds the ground with sheets of rain. By dawn, the HOA pool was a disaster. The aging drainage system had ruptured under the pressure, flooding the deck and shorting out the pump motors. By mid-morning, the water was murky, filled with debris and unsafe for use. Anna called an emergency meeting, demanding immediate repairs. But the board's coffers were already drained from her legal crusade. The quotes for fixing the pool, tens of thousands of dollars, were impossible to swallow. Families looked at one another, realization dawning their expensive HOA fees had bought them nothing but a broken pool and a stack of legal bills. That afternoon, Carlos knocked on my door. Behind him stood a small group of neighbors, soaked from inspecting the pool. "Nolan," he said, his voice urgent, "we need your help. The HOA pool is shut down, and if it doesn't reopen soon, the whole community loses." I blinked. "You're asking me to fix the same pool?" Anna banned my family from Maria, stepped forward. "Not for her. For us. For the kids. You're the only one with the skills to pull this off." I glanced past them toward my backyard, where kids were splashing in clean, sparkling water under the afternoon sundae. It felt ironic, almost poetic. Anna had tried to shut me down, and now her empire was collapsing. Mia touched my arm. "Do it," she whispered. "Show them who really builds community here." So I did. That evening I walked to the pool, with my tool belt slung over my shoulder, flanked by volunteers, carrying buckets, hoses, and toolboxes. We looked less like rebels and more like a rescue crew. Parents swept debris from the deck, teenagers scooped out leaves, and I crawled into the pump room with a flashlight tracing wires and pipes. The damage was worse than expected but not beyond repair. With some salvaged parts, temporary wiring, and a replacement pump I sourced through an old supplier, we had the system running again within 72 hours. When the pumps whirred to life and clean, water began circulating, cheers erupted from the crowd. Kids clapped, parents hugged, and for the first time in weeks, the community pool sparkled like it had before Anna's reign. I stood on the deck covered in sweat and grime and felt something shift in the air. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. I hadn't just built Project Splashback. I'd proven that when the HOA failed, the community itself could rise. Of course, Anna couldn't stand it. At the next board meeting, she tried to spin the story. Mr. Owen's actions were unauthorized and reckless, she declared. He endangered everyone by tampering with HOA property. But this time the room wasn't buying it. Parents booed. One elderly man stood up and shouted, "If it weren't for Nolan, that pool would still be a swamp." Carlos seized the moment. He rose to his feet, papers in hand. This board no longer represents the interests of Maplewood Heights. I move for a special election to recall the current leadership and replace them with members who will. The motion passed in a landslide. The election date was set for mid-August. Turnout shattered records. Nearly 80% of homeowners cast their votes. And when the results were tallied, Anna and her loyalists were swept out. Carlos was elected president. Maria took over amenities, and 2 other parents joined them to form a new family-centered board. The celebration afterward was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Families poured into the Splash Club and the HOA pool alike, kids darting back and forth between the 2 parents, raising toasts of lemonade and iced tea. Fireworks lit up the sky, their reflection dancing in the water. And in the middle of it all, Anna sat alone on a pool chair binder, clasped to her chest like a life raft. She looked smaller, somehow diminished. When the final vote results were read aloud, she stood silently, then left without a word. Later, as the night wound down, Carlos approached me. "We want you to join the new board, Nolan," he said. "Help us redesign the HOA pool, incorporate some of the features you've pioneered here. The community deserves the best of both worlds." I glanced toward my backyard, where the waterfall glistened in the moonlight, then back at the sparkling community pool we had just revived. "I'll help," I said, "but not as a politician. As a builder, that's who I am." Carlos smiled. "That's all we need." That night, lying in bed beside Mia, I thought about how far we'd come. Anna had tried to banish us, to humiliate us, to crush us under the weight of her rules. Instead, she'd created the very movement that dethroned her. And in saving the HOA pool, the very symbol of her control, I had shown the community that real power doesn't come from binders or clipboards. It comes from action, from people willing to get their hands dirty for something bigger than themselves. But the story wasn't finished yet, because Anna still lived across the street watching everything unravel. And I had the feeling she wasn't leaving Maplewood Heights without one final move. The days following the recall election felt like a new season had dawned in Maplewood Heights. The atmosphere shifted almost overnight. Gone were the tense whispers about HOA patrols and clipboard spies. Instead, neighbors greeted each other at the mailboxes again, kids rode bikes in clusters without fear of reprimand, and laughter once again filled the sidewalks. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt alive. But not everyone embraced the change. From my front porch, I often caught glimpses of Anna Lynch. She no longer strutted in power suits with her binder clutched to her chest. Now she lingered on the edge of sidewalks, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding her expression. Sometimes she stood across the street from my yard, staring at the splash pad as if it were a monument built to spite her. Other times, she'd sit by the near-empty HOA pool, sipping wine while children splashed freely under the new relaxed rules she once outlawed. The sight of their joy must have burned her worse than the August Sunday Carlos and Maria wasted no time after taking office. Their first order of business was to repeal nearly every draconian rule Anna had forced through. Adult-only swim hours were abolished, toys were allowed again, and laughter, yes, actual laughter, was no longer a finable offense. Then they approached me with a proposal. "We want to make the community pool a true centerpiece again," Carlos explained one evening over iced tea on my porch. "Would you be willing to lend your expertise? Maybe help us incorporate some features from the Splash Club?" The offer humbled me. I hadn't built Project Splashback to win influence or prestige. I'd built it to give my kids and every other child in Maplewood Heights the summer they deserved. Still, the thought of blending the spirit of the Splash Club into the HOA pool felt poetic, almost like turning a battlefield into a park. So I agreed. For the next month, I worked side by side with the new board. We installed a smaller splash pad at the HOA pool, built shaded seating modeled after mine, and added a rock feature that doubled as a waterfall. Parents volunteered, teenagers pitched in for community service hours, and slowly the HOA pool became less a symbol of Anna's tyranny and more a gathering place again. On the day the renovations finished, we held a Water Unity Day where families bounced between my backyard and the HOA pool, celebrating both spaces in harmony. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. What began as a ban on my children had birthed not one but two thriving water havens. Anna, however, remained silent. She skipped meetings, ignored neighbors, and rarely left her house, except to glare at me from afar. Then, one afternoon in late September, a for sale sign appeared on her pristine lawn. Word spread quickly Anna was leaving Maplewood Heights. Rumors flew that she had bought a home in a 55 and older community in Florida where children would never disturb her peace again. The night before the moving truck arrived, I found her standing at the edge of my fence. The splash club had been drained for the season, its fountains dry, its slide gleaming in the pale light. Anna's silhouette was rigid, her sunglasses pushed up into her hair, her face unreadable. For a long moment we just looked at each other across the fence. I considered walking over, extending a hand, maybe even offering a truce. But then I remembered Emma's tears, Jason's humiliation, Liam's confusion. I remembered the fines, the warnings, the way Anna had sneered as she tried to strip us of joy. So I simply nodded. She nodded back. And then she turned and walked away without a word. The next morning, the moving truck rumbled down the street. By noon, Anna was gone. Just like that, the storm that had hung over Maplewood Heights all summer had finally passed. Life didn't return to what it was before it became something better. The Maple Splash Club continued not as an act of rebellion, but as a community tradition. Families rotated hosting duties, bringing food, planning events, even organizing birthday parties. Meanwhile, the HOA pool thrived under the new leadership, its usage higher than ever. One Saturday afternoon, as I watched my children dart between the two pools, laughing, playing their voices, mixing with dozens of others, I realized something profound. Anna thought she had punished us by taking away access. Instead, she had forced us to create something greater. She had unwittingly built a stronger, closer, more joyful community than Maplewood Heights had ever known. That evening, as the sun dipped low and parents packed up coolers, I leaned back in my chair and reflected. Sometimes life knocks you down, strips away what you thought you couldn't live without. And in those moments, you have two choices: surrender to bitterness or build something better. I chose to build. And in doing so, I learned a lesson more valuable than any victory over Anna Lynch. Community isn't built on rules, fines, or binders. It's built on laughter echoing across a yard, on neighbors, sharing food, on children, splashing until sunset. Real power doesn't come from control, it comes from connection. So, if you've ever felt crushed by someone who seemed untouchable, remember this: their power only exists as long as you give it to them. Take it back, build your own wave, change the tide. And who knows, you might just end up with a water park in your backyard.